Good afternoon, everyone. Tonight we're having rabbit for dinner, and I've gotten a couple requests for a video to show exactly how we cut up our rabbit. We like to use as much of the rabbit as possible, including what we call the belly flap. And I'm gonna take a few minutes here while I'm getting our dinner together to show you how we do that. Okay. So in this bag, I have thawed out a couple of the rabbits that we processed. We had attempted to vacuum seal our rabbits, and I would say it wasn't exactly a success. I much prefer the shrink wrap method. And if you have questions about that, I'll link a video that I took probably a month ago about that process. I much prefer it over vacuum sealing. So here we have one butchered rabbit. We're going to be cutting up 2 of these rabbits. Now each week we eat 1.5 rabbits. 2 we find is way too many. 1 is not quite enough. So 1.5 is what we plan for. So what I'll do is I'll be cutting up 2 rabbits today and showing you exactly how we do that. And then one of the rabbits, half of it, will go into the refrigerator to be ready for the next time that we have a rabbit dinner. Okay, so here is our bunny. I will note that if you have, when you're butchering your rabbits, if you have any pieces of fat left on your bunny, wait to remove this fat until it's been chilled for a little while, because the fat does just peel off. I have read and seen that the fat doesn't taste very good. I haven't tried it, but waiting until after it's chilled does make it a lot easier to remove. Okay, so I don't get too nitpicky about the fat, but I do get off what looks like too much to me. Now, I'm going to start here with the front legs, and I like to try to get some of this brisket meat here. It's not much, but every little bit counts when you're growing your own food and when you're trying to feed your family. So I'm going to start by cutting along the sternum here and going back underneath the shoulder blade here. Now this shoulder blade is not attached with anything but muscles and tendons, so it's actually very easy to get through. Goodness, this fat is sticky. So I'll show you how all that works. I like to try and incorporate some of this meat here that's attached to the ribs when I cut these front arms off. So I'm gonna kind of hold tight to the brisket so it doesn't run away from me, and cut along the sternum and along the rib cage here. We're going to be going underneath the shoulder blade and trying to get as much of this rib meat as we can in this front arm cut. Okay, so here we have what's left and what we got. Okay, this is the front arm from one rabbit. And we're going to repeat the process on the other side. See, we've got this like brisket meat here and this good meat along the rib cage. We're going to try to get all of that. If you can't get it all in one go, I would still try to take time and get some of that off, especially if you've got small children to feed. Every little bit adds up, and you almost get a free portion if you take your time with it versus rushing through it. So we've cut down behind the shoulder blade there. And I'm going to try to incorporate this meat on this side into the cut. Okay, so here is the other arm off with the extra bits of meat. Okay. The next thing I focus on are these back legs here. If you feel along the back here, you can sort of feel where the rabbit's hip is. I like to try and cut just outside of the hip bone in order to help me remove the leg. So feel for that hip bone, cut just outside of it, and you'll feel a little bit of resistance from some bone there. The hip bone does have a ball and socket joint, and our goal is going to be to cut in between those. So I've cut my slit here. I'm going to cut a little bit away inside of the hip bone there to help me free up this section. So the hip bone is right here, and we're staying just outside of that. Same thing on this side. The hip bone is right here. It's going to be a lot of feeling around to figure it out. And we're going to cut just outside of that. And we're trying to meet ourselves at this ball and socket joint, okay? So if we open up the rabbit and splay it out, here's the hip bone in here. We're going to be cutting these tendons away and trying to expose that ball and socket joint. It might be a little bit hard to see, but here's the ball, here's the socket. If we support underneath the hips with one hand and underneath the leg with the other and push upward, we're able to separate that ball and socket joint and make a free space to cut the leg off. Like this, okay? So there's one back leg, and there's our ball joint. So we're trying not to dull our knives while trying not to waste any meat. See the socket joint there? We got a little bit of meat on there, but we've done pretty well. So again, with this side, I'm a little bit less smooth with it on one side. I will do my best. So I'll cut just outside the hip bone here. Okay? And then I will cut just outside the hip bone, trying to meet towards that ball and socket joint. I've hit bone, so I'm going to stop. And just along the hip bone in the back, inward until we hit that ball and socket joint, okay? So I've hit it there. At this point, I'll splay the rabbit open. You can see these tendons holding right here. Here's the hip, here's the leg. This is where we want to find our ball and socket joint to get in between. So we've cut down to the bone there, and if you support the hip and then support the leg and push up, you're able to create space in between the ball and the socket. And then remove the leg. Whoops. Just like that, okay? So there's the other leg. Now the next thing that I like to focus on is this belly flap here. Like I said, when you're feeding small children, these little cuts matter because it adds up to a good portion for them. So it's like getting a free portion out of it. When you're looking at removing the belly flap, you're going to feel along the side of the rabbit for the rib ends. And you're going to cut just outside of that, all the way down to this tenderloin portion, okay? So I'm going to feel for the ribs and cut just outside of those. They do go at an angle down to our tenderloin here, okay? And now I will cut a horizontal line along the tenderloin and remove the entirety of that belly flap. This is a good amount of meat, and we've got 2 of them. Okay, so again on this side, I'm going to be cutting along just outside of where the ribs end, down to the tenderloin piece. Okay? See, we're down to that tenderloin piece, which there is some fat, so if I can grab it easily and pull it off, I generally do. And then we're going to be cutting horizontally in order to remove that second belly flap, okay? The belly flaps are what our 3-year-old will eat. Okay, so now we have the white meat portion of the rabbit, which is this backstrap and tenderloin combination here. We're going to be freeing that up by simply removing the rib cage and removing the hip, and what we're left with is this very large portion of meat. So I'll start with the rib cage. Again, you'll feel for the last rib and where it meets the tenderloin. You're going to be cutting a diagonal slice up until you reach the backbone, and you'll feel that resistance. So I've met the backbone there. I'm going to stop, turn the rabbit over, feel for the last rib, and cut another diagonal slice up to the backbone. And I will stop. So see, I've got a slice here and a slice here. Now, when I turn the rabbit inside, if I do the same thing that I did with the back legs, except for in reference to this portion up here, if I place my hand behind the rib cage and one underneath the back strap and push up, I can get a good break in between the bones for a good point of separation. Now see, this is where I'm not as perfect at it. There is a rib head right there. Okay. But as you can see, little hiccups, no big deal. I apparently just missed the last rib. There. But problem solved. The rib cage is now off, and we've got to focus on the hips. Don't throw this out. This is great for your bone broth. So you can feel along up here. You've got a hip bone here and a hip bone here, and it's all connected. This whole piece is going to go in my bone broth bag. So I'm going to cut just inside this hip bone here. But to get the leg off, we cut outside. To get the hip bone off, we're going to cut just inside until we meet the backbone. So it's at an opposite diagonal from your rib cage. So we've got a hip bone here. I'm going to cut just inside until I've reached the backbone. Okay, we have a slice here and a slice here, and we just need to be able to get through to this backbone. So from the inside, you can place your hand around the meat that you want and around the hip that you don't, and separate just like this, okay? It creates a great spot where a knife easily goes through. So here's the hip, and here's the piece of meat that you want. That back strap with the tenderloins attached. That is pretty much the equivalent to white meat on a chicken, okay? And we're going to add this to our pile. We've got quite a lot of rabbit meat here. I'm going to be cutting up one of these back portions in half this way and putting it in the refrigerator along with one belly flap, one back leg, and one front leg. So since we only eat a rabbit and a half per week, that is how I will divvy up my rabbit. It's pretty obvious with the parts that there are two of, but for this back portion where there's only one of it and I still want to cut my rabbit straight in half, I'll just be cutting right down the middle here and saving one half for next time and one half for tonight, along with another whole rabbit. Okay, and in order to manage cutting this in half, I'm going to basically do just what I do for all of the other general body cuts. I'm just going to be cutting down until I hit bone, going straight across the street from the spine, going down until I hit bone, and then from the inside facing up, I'll grab both ends and bend them apart, separate the bones there, and cut them in half. So now I have two of the back portion. Like I said, one of them is for tonight and one of them is for a later day. Now on to making dinner. Like I said, I like to convert a lot of the rabbit recipes that I have into crock pot recipes. It doesn't work for every recipe, but for many of them it does. And it saves me a lot of time. I'm not exactly comfortable leaving my oven alone when I'm not home. And for days that we travel to the chiropractor or another appointment, I like to be able to set it and forget it. The first thing you're going to want to do is oil the inside of your pot. Avocado oil is one of my favorites because I can't taste it. And it's one of those good fats. If you choose to not oil your pot, that's fine, but the rabbit will stick. Ask me how I know. All right, our crock pot is all oiled. I've got my rabbit and a half, and I'm just going to lay it down inside, piece by piece. The rabbit recipe that we're using tonight is actually called Marinated Rabbit, and it's in our book from Living Traditions Homestead, their 25 favorite rabbit recipes for their family. I'll link this cookbook below. It's a very easy marinade. Because I'm cooking it low and slow, I haven't marinated the rabbit overnight or anything like they suggest. I'm just going to add the marinade straight to the crock pot and turn it on. Alright, so I've got my rabbit all loaded into the crock pot. It is sitting in the wonderful marinade, and I am going to cook this rabbit on low for 4 to 5 hours. That gets a perfect doneness that just falls off the bone. It's not dry, and it's not chewy and hard to get off the bone like rabbit sometimes is. It just falls off the bone, and our family loves it.
Have you eaten food? Do I get food? Wait. Oh, nice. This is so easy to roll.
Molly's so bony yummy.
Yeah, I destroyed it. Yeah.
Poor Hagar. She's regretting her life decision. I could start weaning them from her now, but this week they turned 5 weeks, next week they turned 6 weeks, so I'll just wait a little while. Sorry, Hagar. Yep. Yeah, she's gonna try to escape. Those are your babies acting a fool.